Вечно так, да. Рыбчатый лук, рэпчатый лук, точно, да. Этот лук понимает. Да, да, ну, да. А чеснок нет в этом. У меня нормальный лук. Спортивный, да. Панковый. Тисно, тисно. Нет, там что тоже. Ух ты, очень серьезно. Здравствуйте. Что такое, где? Ням-ням-ням. Помадна. Исторический. Вот это совсем другое дело. Если исторический, тогда... Зачем он-то? Не надо, успокойся. Хотя, ладно, прикольно же даже. Посмотрите, как работает.
As well as testing people to know who's sick with COVID, we need to actually look at the virus and see if a new variant is emerging. This map shows different COVID-19 variants over time. We need to see that change in variants very quickly. That lets scientists figure out what tools are working and where to focus resources. Today, over 100 countries are collaborating to take that sequencing data and upload it to see the variant trends.
We have been seeing.
But that's a starting data point. And theoretically, by taking multiple of these individuals that share DNA and building their family trees using traditional genealogy and public source documents like census records and obituaries and newspaper articles and find a grave.
Старается за все силы, он что-то там все дергает. У меня Android -3, так что тут особо-то не разъяснит.
.com. You build this family tree back until you get two of these relatives of the Golden State Killer. You get them to intersect, where now you see, oh, they share great-great-grandparents. Together. Theoretically, Golden State Killer is a descendant from those same great-great-grandparents. So once I identify that common ancestor, it's now identifying every single descendant from those great-great-grandparents. And this becomes a huge process. People in the 1840s would typically have 15 kids. You have to identify each of those.
Их детей, а затем всех их детей, а затем всех их детей. Итак, теперь у нас есть это экспоненциально растущее генеалогическое древо. Какой ширины было это дерево? Я думаю, что у нас было более 1000 человек в этом генеалогическом древе, но мы многое знали о нашем преступнике. Мы были уверены, что он родился между 1940 и 1960 годами. Мы знали, что он белый мужчина. Мы знали, что он был от 5 футов 8 дюймов до 5 футов 10 дюймов. Вы знаете, он в Калифорнии. Он в Сакраменто в 1976 году. Он в Южной Калифорнии в 80-х годах, и мы в основном сузили круг до примерно 5 мужчин. А затем это просто расследование. Этой весной, когда подозреваемый был у них под рукой, они проследили за ним до магазина хобби в районе Сакрамента и взяли образец ДНК с ручки дверцы его машины. Несколько дней спустя следователи извлекли еще один образец ДНК
Не так уж и это вот
из одной выброшенной ткани, который зарегистрировал совпадение с уликами ДНК, оставленными на одном из мест преступления. Следователи в Калифорнии говорят, что улики ДНК привели их к одному из самых известных серийных убийц страны. Вчера был арестован бывший офицер полиции Джозеф Джеймс Дианджело, и его считают так называемым убийцей из Золотого Штата. В течение 44
какой
лет
стороны ты смотришь? Я тебе просто говорю, да, то есть, что со стороны того, что тебе, тебе для чего надо, смотри, вот тебе нужен язык, да тебе не нужен язык, понимаешь? Да, да, да. Ну, если ты уезжать собираешься, тогда да, то есть, ну, понимаю, да, 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 да. Ну, то есть, ну, не мучи, как говорится, да, просто для чего, понимаешь? Вот тебе надо уметь считать на счетах. Ну, ты чуть-чуть научишься, и для чего, просто чтобы, ну, это про себя понимаю, это просто, да, да, да. Ну, почему нет? Это надо, если ты хочешь свободно с людьми общаться, и то, опять же, тут это самое. Если ты хочешь, да, постигнуть, как бы, что без контакта, вот, да, понимаете, да, да, да. Да, ну, исторически как-то, наверное, ну, все равно, да, то есть, не настолько он нужен, как тебе его можно запугать, да. Тебе кажется, так, типа того, да. Понимаю, то есть, да. И не в такой мере, наверное. Ну да. Ну, типа, ну делать-то все равно нехер, правильно? Наоборот, нет. Ну, ты понимаешь. Ну, чтобы заниматься спокойной работой, да, наверное, тоже надо будет, да.
Countless investigators have worked it and have failed to solve it. Within 4.5 months, a team of 6 were able to figure out who the Golden State Killer was, and that was Joseph D'Angelo.
Ты не понимаешь, что ли? Ты можешь без переводчика можешь смотреть сейчас любое видео. По Яндексу, по Гуглу, там, да, по Ютубу просто, да, да. То есть вообще любое, там, хоть китайское, хоть корейское, там, ну, я не знаю, все языки или не, ну, да, задействованы или не все, но, скорее всего, все. Ну, это вопрос времени только всего лишь, на самом деле, да, понимаете. Да. Ну, самый популярный, ну, английский, да, уж точно. Европейский точно, наверное, какой-нибудь французский-то наверняка тоже, и немецкий. Вот то там франкоговорящих же полно, вот их тоже, да, испанский тоже, наверное, да. Да, там, немецких, ну, да, тоже что-то такое, да, наверное. Итальянский, ну, это более редкие, наверное, языки считаются, поэтому. Хотя, хер знает, не знаю. Просто, ну, европейские какие-то, да, там. Хинди эти, ну, да, наверное, тоже. А может и нет, не знаю. Смотри, ну, китайцы сами себе не переведут, что ли, ты что думаешь? Ну, просто, да. Да, короче, вот вообще просто хочешь ты и смотри буквально, да, ну нет, он про Яндекс говорил, да. Кстати, наверное, да, у них же Яндекс, ну не знаю, YouTube разрешен, Яндекс запрещен, наоборот. Ну ладно. Да, просто вот это надо иметь в виду. Ну да. Кстати, интересно ты сказал, да. Делай выводы, то есть теперь можно вообще любое видео смотреть, любую программу, да. Но я, конечно, с опломбом говорю, да. То есть, ну, нет, русскоязычного просто обычно, вот бабка какой-нибудь. Вот бабка сейчас сидит где-нибудь, штукатурщица где-нибудь, да, это раз, вот, то есть ничего знать тебе не надо вообще просто. Включила вот телефон, YouTube обычный через Яндекс, и сиди себе, смотри, что хочешь вообще, на любых языках, да, понимает. Только ничего не хотят, наверное, это же другой вопрос, да. Понимаете, да. Ну ладно.
Killer was identified. The floodgates opened. And we were seeing every week, not only single killers, but multiple killers, serial killers. Every week we're being identified from cases in the 70s and 80s.
Because there's been over 70 cases now that they've solved this way, and they continue to solve them at a fairly regular rate. And I think
Presumably that rate's just going to increase.
yeah,
And there's going to be more because it's working. And we
In California in the 80s, we basically narrowed it down to about 5 males, and then it's just investigations.
With a suspect at their fingertips, this spring they followed him to a Sacramento area Hobby Lobby store and took a DNA sample from his car door handle. Days later, investigators recovered another DNA sample from one discarded tissue, which registered a match to DNA evidence left at one of the crime scenes.
investigators in California say DNA evidence led them to one of the country's most notorious serial killers.
Former police officer Joseph James D'Angelo was arrested yesterday, and he is believed to be the so-called Golden State Killer.
Так это надо тогда это подгружать заранее надо это все, да?
4 years, countless investigators have worked it and have failed to solve it. Within 4.5 months, a team of 6 were able to figure out who the Golden State Killer was, and that was Joseph D'Angelo.
After the Golden State Killer was identified, the floodgates opened. And we were seeing every week, not only single killers, but multiple killers, serial killers. Every week were being identified from cases in the 70s and 80s.
Because there's been over 70 cases now that they've solved this way, and they continue to solve them at a fairly regular rate. And I think...
Presumably that rate's just going to increase.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more. Because it's working, and we are going to, you know, help find these people.
But the scary thing is, in the US, you have 100,000 cold case murders with DNA. You have more cold cases, but the ones with DNA is estimated about 100,000. There's roughly about 650,000 sexual assaults, cold cases with DNA.
This seems like a real paradigm shift.
It is. Multiple law enforcement agencies have said that this is the most revolutionary tool they've had since the adoption of the fingerprint.
With traditional DNA, it required...
Эта грязня вот она бесконечно будет. Вот поставили везде камеры и все, и забыли. Просто понял, ну нет.
Getting a sample from the actual individual. It's a one-to-one type of process. And so these offenders who, let's say they have committed crimes and haven't been caught, and they're just living their life, and they're thinking, well, my DNA has never been taken from me. So I may have left DNA in the case that I committed back in 1975, but they've never gotten my DNA. They won't find me. But now, we don't have to rely upon that. Somebody distantly related to that offender has put their DNA into a database. And they have to start getting nervous because that's outside of their control. They can't account for a third cousin and what that third cousin is doing. And so they start getting nervous. And I've kind of wondered how many of these individuals recognize that law enforcement is eventually going to be knocking on their door as a result of a third cousin putting their DNA in the database.
Each person who uploads their information to a database illuminates the identities of...
Чтобы не было, да, понимаешь, они могут быть добрыми, да, настоящими, как-то, да, влиять на то, что на психологический климат, да, он тебя понял просто, да.
Hundreds of other people around them, parents, siblings, aunts and uncles, and cousins. A study by Ancestry DNA found the average person in the UK has 175 third cousins. And it doesn't stop there. The DNA in one person will be shared by hundreds of people yet to be born. Children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and cousins once or twice removed. Realistically, each person shares identifiable DNA with nearly 1,000 people, past and future. So it doesn't take many people uploading their data to reveal the identities of everyone living in a country. Back in 2018, a study found that using an existing database of just 1.3 million people, they could identify 60% of all Americans of European descent. And they estimated with a database containing just 2% of the population, you could find a third cousin or closer match in 99% of cases.
DNA storage is one of the things that we have that is really unlike anything else. If you look inside, this is at minus 20 degrees Celsius.
That keeps the DNA good for a long time?
We have DNA samples in here that are probably about 15 years old.
How many samples are stored in there?
Just over 2 million.
Whoa!
Yeah. So the capacity is just over 2 million.
2 million people's DNA stored in this one small room.
Correct.
Wow. By 2021, over 30 million people worldwide have taken a direct-to-consumer genetic test, the majority of which are through Ancestry and 23andMe, which do not currently work with law enforcement. But Family Tree DNA does.
If you ask Americans, should we have a national database where everyone's logged in it?
As their DNA.
Yeah, by their DNA and their name. Most Americans will be somewhat uncomfortable at, or potentially very uncomfortable with that. But we're kind of sleepwalking into that scenario.
There are some people who are concerned with privacy. If anyone chooses or decides that they do not want their results to be used for law enforcement matching, they can remove themselves from that.
I do worry about genetic information being used to discriminate against someone.
My biggest thing is health insurance. I worry about if you have somebody's DNA profile and some law is enacted, gets into the wrong hands, and they say that this person has a proclivity, they're headed towards Parkinson's, they're headed towards this, headed towards that, and then rates skyrocket. That's the biggest place that I see as a privacy concern.
Once your genetic information's out there, it's out there. It's not like a credit card where you can get a new one. Yeah, you're giving away something that you don't know what it can do.
Well, yeah, our information isn't ours in the first place. Like,
Right.
our information is shared.
Yes, with your relatives.
Yes.
And although you may be adverse to this sort of thing, if they've already done it, in a way, you're out there.
In society today, you very clearly have two camps. There are those that are very comfortable having their genome available to be able to be searched for law enforcement purposes, and there are others that are not comfortable at all. And that's okay.
The problem is, of course, those people who don't want theirs to be searchable could have their DNA uploaded inadvertently by their relatives. Do you know what I mean? So, like, if I don't want my DNA to be searchable by law enforcement, but my sister uploads hers,
Yes.
it's almost as good as me doing it myself.
Right now, Family Tree DNA's policy is we will only accept samples from law enforcement under certain circumstances. It has to be a sexual assault, identification of remains, DNA recovered from the scene of a homicide. And we also do child abductions. So if there's a child that's kidnapped and there's DNA evidence, we will process the DNA so they can try to find out who the abductor is. Those are the only cases that we will accept.
Got it.
Unfortunately now, GEDmatch has flipped off the switch. And GEDmatch has actually said that you're not allowed to have your information searched without opting in.
Right. Was that decision by GEDmatch a direct result of this Golden State Killer case?
No, it wasn't.
No.
You want to tell the story?
You know, it had to do with a Utah case.
Where an elderly woman was playing the organ in a church.
And there was an individual who broke in and assaulted her.
But it wasn't a sexual assault, but it's a serious crime.
I believe tried to strangle her and left her for dead. I believe he thought that, she was obviously dead and left. The police, I believe, approached GEDmatch because that they were concerned that he was going to recommit other crimes.
But GEDmatch's terms of service said they would only help law enforcement in cases of rape or homicide.
Her problem was that she didn't die.
Because if she died, then...
If she died, it would have fit the conditions, and they would have uploaded the sample because it met the terms of service and everything.
So what happened? They didn't? They didn't take that case?
They did.
They subsequently caught the individual from that search that they performed on GEDmatch.
But people within the genealogy world kind of got their passions inflamed, saying that is stepping outside of what this tool should be used for, and they ended up putting a lot of pressure on GEDmatch.
They flipped the switch because they got freaked out.
But at the end of the day, it was a violation of terms of service, and I think ultimately led to a good thing. Everybody got zeroed out, and then everybody gets to sign back in.
Subsequently, GEDmatch was sold to Verigen.
I can tell you, a new user today, when they sign up for GEDmatch, about 73% of them are signing up to allow law enforcement to search. We're pretty happy with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a high number.
It's a high number.
And it suggests that people want that, in a sense.
How many second cousins or third cousins do you know? You know what I mean? You don't know that many of them. Without even knowing it, you're helping justice. You're helping a victim's family get a little bit of peace. Not closure, but a little bit of peace.
To get an
Why
answer.
not?
Partly, you could make an argument that if you want to be an activist helping catch criminals, one of the best things you can do is, like, encourage everyone you know to be tested and put in the database.
Correct. And, there are millions of people who have tested at other companies that are not working with law enforcement. And if they want to help, all they have to do is download their raw data, and they can upload it for free into our database.
I absolutely believe in a person's right to privacy, but I also absolutely believe we have a right not to get murdered or sexually assaulted or be part, having violent crimes committed against us. There has to be an equal balance.
That scale of my privacy has been taken because of a third cousin has been identified versus a mother who's talking about her daughter has been murdered, that scale is way the hell like this.
We're at a point now where, in many ways, technology has kind of outstripped where the laws are. I truly believe that ultimately this tool and all the concerns with it will probably end up in front of the nation's Supreme Court, and there will be a decision. My bottom line message, if you're going to make a decision, if there's going to be laws restricting law enforcement to use it, make sure that you're making an informed decision and not assuming what it is based on its DNA and genetics and law enforcement, because it really isn't what you think it is.
I got to keep a couple million people happy so that I have access to the identities, kind of, in a sense.
In a sense, right.
Of millions, hundreds of millions of people.
Right.
That's a pretty selective sample. These are people who are willing to give up their information to find their ancestors.
Yeah.
There may be many others who are militantly private, but they don't get a say in the decision of whether they're going to be searchable through that person or not.
True. That's the choice you make. So that, to me...
That's the choice you don't make.
It's a choice you don't make, but it's also... It's the choice we have to make as a society, is what's that balance? There is always going to be winners and losers in my mind, right? And I don't want to use losers in the negative sense there, but in a decision, at the end of the day, you have to balance, in my mind, the public safety with the public privacy.
Is DuckDuckGo, is that good?
I use it. I'm a little paranoid. So it's supposed to not track you as much, I guess. But, yeah.
I have been working on this video for a couple of years, so I really want to thank Brilliant for sponsoring it. I appreciate their willingness to support me tackling complex and important stories. Brilliant is a website and app that teaches you all kinds of STEM concepts in an interactive and in-depth way. If you want to learn more about DNA or solving mysteries with deductive reasoning, I would recommend their courses on computational biology and logic. Check out this interactive logic puzzle. You have to figure out if the light is on or off, knowing that some of the characters may be lying to you. And instead of just telling you the solution, Brilliant allows you to try different configurations and discover the answer for yourself. If you get stuck, there are helpful hints to guide you along the way. In this instance, the light is on. See if you can figure out why. Now, Brilliant is offering 20% off an annual subscription to the first 200 people to sign up. Just go to brilliant.org/Veritasium. I will put that link down in the description. So I want to thank Brilliant for supporting Veritasium, and I want to thank you for watching.